I'm going to be talking about the consequence of design. I'm going to talk about design kind of at the beginning, like what do I mean by design? And then the other half will be like some tools to help you think about the consequence of design and be a little bit more practical and tangible. But kind of the first half is very like conceptual, so stick with me, and if you have questions, you can interrupt. This can be a dialogue, but I'll also answer a bunch of questions at the end too. I'm still kind of developing this, right? So hopefully you guys can help me out. I'm also going to be bringing some of these friends along that have helped me think about this. I don't know all these people. Some of them are no longer with us, but they've kind of helped me formulate these ideas. You might even know some of these people. Okay, so the goal is to give you a framework and tools to help you make design decisions that align to your values. So it's not only just tools of like how to be a better designer, but how may you use those to actually make the world a better place. So this sounds kind of like high level, sounds kind of an impossibility, but that's why I'm developing this framework, so you can actually do this on a day-to-day basis. It's not something like, oh, I hope to achieve this someday. Maybe it's something you can chip away at every single day. And why am I inspired to talk to you? Because it seems like the decisions that we're making are becoming more and more important. So, like I said, she mentioned I've been in the industry for 20 years, and you think, okay, I'm making these wireframes, or I'm making these deliverables, and are they really having any impact? I mean, most things don't even get built, right? That's just ephemeral. But I'm going to argue that all of our decisions that we make and the people that we work with are influenced by the things that we make. So I think we need to go beyond usability, which is great, because in the last 20 years, we've really had to fight for usability. Now we're there, and we're making usable things. But I also think we need to think about the long-term effects of how that's going to affect everyone in society and future generations. Okay, so here's where we get to design. Design is a very hard thing to define. So I started with, okay, here's some design titles, and they all have design in them, but the ones that I've bolded kind of overlap, right? Like experience design, web design, UX design, product design. What does even all that mean? And industrial designers and product designers are having this kind of like tension right now. So these are some of the titles I've had over the last 20 years, and only a couple of them had designer in the title. So I've been all these things, multimedia specialist, information architect. When I was an experience planner, I was still doing these things. I was still designing. But then when I told people my title, they're like, experience planner, so you do events? Is that like weddings and stuff? I'm like, no. I'm actually doing digital projects, and I'm actually using all these different types of design to make things, right? So as you can kind of see, over the years, the industry has changed. It's become more mature, and then we're trying to align, like the user experience designer and product designer seem to have aligned with more of people that are in the industry and trying to create some kind of consistency. But that is very difficult to do. One of the things that I practice more and more is graphic design. So I found this great definition of graphic design from the 1920s, so 100 years ago, that still kind of aligns with what we're doing as far as graphic design goes. You know, using clearly legible, simple typefaces for readability. We're trying to, fulfill the demands of each job, so we're trying to figure out what the problem is we're trying to solve. We're trying to use a nice balance of space in clear geometric layouts, so we're using white space and whatnot. Exploiting new technologies, of course. And the only thing I did was cross off printer because, sure, we have to have a close collaboration with the developer, but even now we're still doing print medium, right? But this really kind of struck me as like, wow, this is something that is a discipline that hasn't changed or has evolved, but the definition still remains true. And let's see, Karel Tija is the Czech modernist who came up with that. But then when I thought, that's just one thing that we do graphic design, we're doing information architecture, we're doing all kinds of other things. So I thought I found this. This is actually grammatically correct. Design is to design a design to produce a design. That's why design is such a hard thing to define. Because each one of these, like you have the concept of designing, you have the process of designing, you have these deliverables that you design, and then you have the design specifications. So that's not helpful at all. And this is the gentleman that made that up or turned me on to that sentence. This is the design that I think we're doing or trying to achieve. It is one of the basic characteristics of what it means to be human. You're not, you study to be a designer, but everyone designs. Everyone on my team designs. The product person, the developers that are always like, well, Matt, you go ahead and do your thing and come back to us. It's like, no. We're going to sit down, we're going to collaborate, and you're going to have a lot of great ideas as well. And they always do, and I always kind of have to force it out of them. So you might be on teams with developers, and they're saying, the first thing they say is, like, I can't draw, because I'm like, hey, let's sketch this out. Like, oh, I can't draw. I'm like, well, don't draw. Just write words. Explain it to me, or maybe I can help you draw what you're trying to say. So I guess what I'm saying is, we're all designers innately, and you need to pull that out of your team and out of yourself. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Buckminster Fuller, but he's, I feel like he would have went to this school if he was alive at the time, because I love that he's like, a designer is an emerging synthesis of artist, inventory, mechanic, objective economist, and evolutionary strategist. So he's most famous for developing these geodesic domes to use for architecture because they use the least amount of stuff to create the most structure, right? And he's got a great, I've got a couple other things that he says in here, but he's someone that has always inspired me to think about how to design, and whether it's digital projects or not, just to think about it as far as humanity goes and why we're all here and why we're even doing it. Okay, so this is where it's like, gets a little somber. We start to think about the consequence of design. Sure, we want to make the world a better place. We want to create all these cool things. But we need to ask ourselves, what are we actually doing? What is the final application and use of the product of my work? And ultimately, am I going to be ashamed that I created this? This made me think of some of the colleagues that I've had over the years that one was an industrial designer, and he was gonna make toys. He wanted to create toys for kids, and then he realized, no, all that I'm gonna create is gonna end up in landfills. This is all gonna be ephemeral, but they're gonna be produced. So he went into digital design, and that's how I met him. He's like, look, what's your background? And I'm like, wow, it's a cool background. He's like, yeah, but I wanted to work in a place that it wouldn't just be trash, right? Another colleague of mine, one of our clients was a government client, and they were, working with the Navy, and he's like, you know what, I'm not working on this project because it goes against some of my values. And I was like, wow, I didn't really, back then, I didn't know you could do that. It's like, I'm not going to work on this? Okay, that's really cool. So that kind of led me to, this person kind of inspired me to actually get into computers. So this is, over 20 years ago, and HCI had just started here at U of M. There was another school doing it at Carnegie Mellon, but the only other place was MIT. And that, I didn't even know about human-computer interaction. I heard about this media lab because there was artists and there were psychologists, all these people working in computers. I was like, oh, I don't have to be a computer scientist to work in computers? All right, where can I go? So that's how I found this school. But this woman created this really cool thing. It's a little device that reads your facial expressions and helps provide feedback for people that may not be able to deal with social cues so well, so like autistic people, and that way they feel a little bit more comfortable interacting with other people. And as you can see, this thing is being trained on a device, and it's being trained on one person. It's one parameter, right? Well, this is kind of early artificial intelligence. Zoom into the future. Now we can train artificial intelligence on all kinds of stuff. So what they did is they evolved this, and they call it Affectiva, and it sounds like a sweetener. They help businesses understand how their customers and consumers feel when they can't or won't say themselves. What? That's cool. Or is it? Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to take this data so they can improve the customer experience. That's cool. But also marketing campaigns. I feel like that's a huge departure from helping people that can't communicate to helping commercial interests. And, like I said before, it was like they're training it on one person, and that's a great data set, but now they have all these data sets to figure out all of these things. And that's a way to sell more products, which is cool, but there's already all these trickery to sell you more things by using psychological tricks, right? You don't need artificial intelligence to do that. So you combine this with artificial intelligence, it really makes me think. Okay, so that's kind of like the bummer of it, right? And now I don't know if anyone's read any of the Sochet and Zuboff stuff. It was required reading when I was here, but this book came out not too long ago. It's called Surveillance Capitalism. And in that, she argues that with these systems that can monitor your behavior, like the one I just showed, they can do so without your explicit consent, right? You've already did the terms and conditions, so now what does it do? Well, it can actually modify your behavior by recording your behavior and other people's behavior that have behavior like yourself and kind of coax you to do certain things. And one of the engineers said, we are learning to write the music and then let the music make them dance. Wow, that's super powerful stuff, but I mean, are you doing that for the betterment of humankind, or are you doing that for commercial interest? Like, why are you doing that? So, I guess what I'm trying to say here is, sure, we all have different values. My values are probably different than your values, but I want people to start thinking about their values, so at least they're thinking about that when they're designing. They're not just building something because they can. And she argues we have an obligation to shape the digital future. We must demand technology companies operate with transparency, accountability, and responsibility. That's the sentence there where we demand technology companies to do things. I mean, how are we going to do that? Are we going to get Congress to act? Are we going to get legislators? That's where I was like, yeah, I mean, we need to do that, but I also think we are the people in power. We're the ones that are creating these things. What if we just did the right thing? We don't need these other people to say, or to, what, if you heard about this, they're trying to say, let's stop artificial intelligence for 6 months. It's like, well, why didn't we just already kind of infuse our values into that so we didn't have to worry about bias and things kind of running off the rails? But, so here's Bucky again. This guy's great. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, you build a new model. Make the existing model obsolete. Fight forces. Don't fight forces, use those forces. So I always love that. So that's what I'm kind of saying, like, we have that ability. Sure, it's not like we're going to do a huge uprising, but I think like when you go out and design things, you can start thinking about this. Okay, so that's the first half of that kind of the problem. And what I've done is the way I started thinking about this, and like I said, this is still forming in my mind, so I'm hoping to get help from you all, is using time and place as a way to orient yourself and as a way to get your bearings so when you do start designing, you can use these tools as time and space on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so what is place? So Hillel Saarinen, I don't know if anyone's ever been to Cranbrook, but he designed the school and he's a famous architect. And this, I always bring this up to the teams I'm on, it's like we always design a thing considering it in its larger context. A chair in a room in a house in an environment, and then that environment's within a city. And so you need to think about that too, of like, okay, I'm building an app, where does that app live? What's within the app? How do I explain this app? And what else does it affect? So being an architect and having a school campus that he designed is pretty amazing. And all that within there, he had a son that came up with some really cool furniture, so like all of that kind of works together. But that's all well and good if you're an architect. What if you're an information architect or a product designer like yourselves? So she had this great keynote, this is over 10 years ago. Abby Covert, she's also called Abby the IA. She's a leader in information architecture, and she came up with this system that I'm going to show you that is really helpful way to orient yourself and build digital products. But I'm also saying we can leverage this to think about our values and infuse that in the things that we do. So we need to start talking about place and how that relates to the ecosystem. So let's just start at the very top, the ecosystem. What am I even talking about? Well, let's think of it as an example. So we're here at U of M, a higher learning institution. Cool. Everyone can understand that concept. That's a huge ecosystem. And the tools that we can use to kind of describe that ecosystem are using Venn diagrams and control vocabularies, putting things kind of tangible. And that system is here to educate scholars and yourselves and myself. And you can use Gantt charts and swim lane diagrams, right? All these fun little tools that we have as information architectures and product designers. And then within that, you have these structures. So for instance, an LMS, right? An application to help you find your classes. And this might be something that you're working on or that you will be working on. So you have hierarchy maps, you have site maps, and these are just tools that you use every day. Now you need to think about traveling between these points in the journey. So you can use experience maps, you use service blueprints, and I'm not going to go into each one of these deliverables. This is something you can learn on your own or you already probably know about. These are in your tool belt, and then you think about the location. What class section of that LMS? You can use flow diagrams and whatnot. And so what I'm arguing is that all these things are interconnected. A lot of times you're thinking about the context, the circumstances. You have these scenarios. And as I'm going through some of these tools, I realize that not all of us work on all of those tools at once. Sometimes it's somebody else that is giving you that report. Maybe someone else is giving you these scenarios. Here's another level down, a person who interacts with an object. Well, you need to think about that person that's using that LMS that's in higher education that is stressed out. And you can work on what that person would be like by using personas. But maybe I'm not creating personas. Maybe it's our user researcher that's giving us the persona, right? So are their values in that, and how are you going to input your values there? Okay, finally, we're going down and down. We have the user that's using an interface, and that thing could be the syllabus itself. You're going to use wireframes and schematics, right? All very like typical stuff. Now you're downloading the file, you have specifications, all the way down to a download button. But remember, you have this download button that you're using from, maybe you stole it from somewhere else, right? You just said, hey, I'm going to use this button so you can download this thing for this user in this context. But I'm arguing that if we're spending a lot of time here with using style guides or we're already using things off the shelf, we need to think about what's happening up here. And I'm having more and more influence up here, and sometimes I'm working up here and down here. But you also have to think about who is working up here and how you can influence them. How can you get their values to get put into this thing that you're building? How can what I create here influence up and down? So what are users expecting? Which ways can we affect these other areas? I mean, this is still getting conceptual, but at least you have these tools and you can start thinking about it. And, whoops. And I'm saying you can influence each one of these areas. And I kind of clump these because, it's very, in product design, you spend a lot of time here, but sometimes the strategy starts here and then it comes down. It's really hard to, totally affect the ecosystem, but I'm saying that it's still connected and that you should still think about doing that. So how can you have, how can this lowly button have, this transformative effect on society? I'm not saying that the button is going to do that, but if you think about that throughout your design process, and you think about it constantly, that's going to help you, and my hypothesis is it's going to make the world a better place, but we'll see, right? Okay, so that's place. That was heavy. Now we're going to talk about time, so time and place. And so I stole a list from Native Americans. There's this 7th generation type of thinking where you think about the different spans of time before and after you. Who came before, who's coming after you, so you can think about how what you design has these long-lasting impacts. Okay, so here's what 7 generations looks like now. So we're here, and it's going to be the 2030s, the 2060s, and then next century, that's great. And then you have the 80s to the 90s, you have the 50s, and the 20s and the 40s, right? Okay, now I'm going to bring us on a journey. We're going to talk about human factors and the things that we design. How did that get started? I'm also going to talk about technology, so we can kind of root ourselves in something we're all familiar with. But I also want you to think about your own life and the people that are in your life. Like, in my life, I had grandparents that lived in a village of 300 people. My son goes to school with 800 people. And then they came to America, they started working and working in factories and fighting in wars, right? So you need to think about this not only in, like what I'm going to say here is human factors and technology. Let's think about how our design systems came about, but also think about it in your personal life and the people around you. So how did we get here? How did we get to now and the technology? Well, we started out with human factors. We had these cool vacuum tubes that blinked and did things and shut on and off. And we were using military research to figure out how not to make errors and to make better machines for killing. Yay. Okay. But then we went on and we started to see, oh, there's other things and more specialized tools that we can actually create more things and create guidelines and designs, and it kind of goes beyond just does it work and does it not have errors, but we can actually have things that are a little bit more user-friendly. And then the GUI was introduced, and then we now have like actual human-computer interaction that is thinking about usability. And we have a little bit more design that's thought about it. And then when you have something that is connected to the internet, things really started to change really fast. So like this was all cool computing, but no one was really, I didn't have a computer then. And then it slowly grew until we kind of all have computers. And now here we are. So in just 3 generations, things have changed quite a bit. And now we're going to go 3 generations in the future, and we're going to have an impact. So now we're called user experience design. We have social computing, artificial intelligence. Cool. So this is a picture of Ivan. He's my son. And he and his friends are in middle school, and they created a game for the Oculus. It's called Rat Runners. And they're running around in this virtual world, and he said, hey, we had a bug fix today. I'm like, what? He's like, well, he had to put a ladder in because all these little, he calls them little kids, all these little kids are in there, and they can't use their, they can't run the wall to get up, so we had to put a ladder in there for them. I'm like, well, that's amazing. You're taking users' feedback and you're fixing it. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I should be giving this talk to him. He needs to think, because he's the one already designing things, and he doesn't even, whatever. That freaked me out. But he's like, hey, we're doing bug fixers, right? But I guess that's the point. We have to think about what we're creating and what we're unleashing onto these kids, because now it's like, he doesn't need to know about computer science to start building these things. He's just building these things in the basement, and I'm like, cool, dude, that's awesome. So how did we get there, right? So when we think about Moore's Law, we always got to talk about Moore's Law, but I thought it was apropos because it's like, oh, things are cruising along pretty well. But this is kind of a lie the way it's actually exponential. When you have 1,000 and then you go to 5 billion, it's not a straight line. And as you can see, this line kind of like, how do we even know what's beyond that? Because it's exponential. We can't really fathom what's going to happen in the next 20 years or 30 years, right? So what is that going to look like? What are we going to be designing? So this guy, this is actually an older photograph, but he's been pushing on what it means to be a human in this technological world. His name is Stellark. And he has done lots of questionable things, but to push on that idea of how do humans interface with the coming technology, because that's where it's going. I mean, if this little kid has got these goggles on and he's not in a world, what other things will be attached to us, and what are we going to be designing? And we should probably start thinking about our values that we're going to infuse in that. So I have like, this is probably something that's going to happen soon, and then who knows? We might not. They're thinking about like having us live forever with technology, because we're going to be changing our biology, right, with machines. Okay, so I'm not going to make any predictions, but I want us to think about where we came from and where we're going, and how do we put our values in there so it doesn't get off the rails. And also this, life is good when you live from your roots. Your values are your critical source of energy, enthusiasm, and direction. Work is meaningful and fun when it's an expression of your true core. And I do believe this. There's no joy equal to that of being able to work for all humanity, doing what you do well. I am in a place now where I am working with institutions and librarians and bringing things online that are in their libraries that they weren't able to do before. And it makes me feel good, and it aligns with my values. But it took me a long time to get there. There was a time where I was working with financial institutions that I was like, didn't have a good feeling about what I was doing. So I kind of just wanted to bring that to you. So now you have homework. Think about what your values are, and think about how they've changed over time. And I'm not saying my values are good or better than your values, but we all have them, and they're going to push us in different ways. But I think if we're more like aware of them, it's going to help us be better designers. All right, that's what I have.
Thanks for listening. Do you have any question for our speaker? Please feel free to raise your hand and just, okay.
I think it's a very straightforward question. How do you deal with conflicting values? Let's say your co-designer has different values than you do.
So that is where I think these tools could be of help, right? So one, you have to get on the same page of that person, or at least understand what their values are. So knowing what your values are, and then understanding what their values are. Maybe they're not conflicting, right? First, you need to figure that out. But if they are conflicting, you can use some of these tools to say, okay, let's draw this out. How would you design this? And if the design is going in different directions, I think that way you can have a better conversation. And you might even come up with a better design, right? So you could use the time and place. Think about where they're coming from or where they think this design is going to go in the future. And that way it's not just like, hey, we got to crank this thing out to get to the developer so they can build it. You can have that conversation and like align your values. And they're never going to be 100%, but at least that way you can have a conversation about it. And it's not just a conversation. You can actually have like physical things that you're drawing on and presenting to like, point at, I don't like this or I do like this. You can probably have a better conversation. Yeah.
So this one isn't really, well, I don't know if there's like an actual answer to it, right? But it's something this is always something that's been on my mind, and I've had a clear idea of my values with design, which I love, but how does this work into this? So this is like a conflict I'm currently having, and will have, but going into like internships, going into entry-level jobs, the barrier to entry is very high, like compared to when you're actually a working professional.
Yes.
There's no like, I don't think there's a direct solution, but how does that raise any ideas for you? What's your advice with that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so that's a hard place to be, right?
Yeah.
I am now fortunate to be working at a place where my values align. It took me a long time to get there. I'm not saying I did any nasty things on my way there,
Yeah.
but you're going to have to work where you can get a job, right? And their values might not align with their mission statement. I was going to bring in mission statements as a tool to use, but it doesn't work. Because if you look at different mission statements like TikTok and Google, they have really great mission statements, but then what are their behaviors?
Yeah.
So what we need, so let's just say, you know what, you're going to get this awesome internship at TikTok, right? And maybe TikTok doesn't align to your values. But you can still go there and understand the inner workings. It's almost like you are a mole, a secret agent on the inside trying to figure out how these design decisions get made. And I'm not saying you're going to go there and create espionage, but you're at least learning from other people. And maybe you can even influence that company with some of your thoughts and ideas. It's not like everyone's set out to be evil just because they're a big company. I think you could go pretty much anywhere and still be able to bring your values there to help other people design. And you're not going to influence the CEO right away, but you're definitely going to, with the different places, you're an intern, you're going to be influencing some of the other people that are on your team, and you're going to also be influencing like the developers and other interns. So that's how I would reconcile it. It's still not the great answer, but I think that's where we're at this point, or at least that's my thinking.
Well, no, I think that's all you can do. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah. It's not like you could be my friend who's like, well, I'm not going to take this Navy job because you're just starting out. It's like, hey, work for the Navy and see what happens. Was there a question over here?
Yeah, I had a very similar question, just the thought of if a company or a team that you're on expresses like, we have these values,
Mhm.
it's easy for them to say that.
Mhm.
And then kind of forget that they ever said that and
Yep.
just go ahead and do something else. And I'm sure you've experienced that conflict as we just kind of discussed. I felt that myself, where I'm like, why do we have these values all sort of written out and celebrated when we're not really doing it? And trying to like just bridge that gap, like bring it into the real world.
Well, what I would do, and what we do currently at Ithaca, is we talk about our values often. And it's, it's not just another meeting, and everyone gets bummed out. It's like, oh my God, another meeting. It's not even about work, it's about values. It's like, no, you kind of have to do that, or else it's going to turn into a place where you don't want to work, or it's going to turn into a place where they're not following the values. And it's hard work. It's not easy to do, and it always seems like, I mean, it's hard enough just to get people to design well, let alone thinking about values. Like, you're still trying to get your foot in the door just to make a good design and trying to battle these, other people that are trying to just make a commercial success out of something. So it's definitely not easy. That's why I was trying to think about these tools that you can do at a very tangible, lower level that you do daily. And that might be a way to say, you could bring up the values in the company. It's like, oh, our value is, let's just say it's belonging, right? Okay, so when you're making something, you can even bring that up as you're showing your deliverable of your interaction design. It's like, how is belonging being infused here? Is it? Does it matter? At least bring it up. Maybe it's irrelevant at that time, but people can start thinking about this. So I agree, like, there's a lot of companies that have these great mission statements, but they don't really follow.
I don't have a question, but just wanted to say that I appreciate your talk a lot because I was reflecting recently on, I started working in programming in 1995.
Okay,
And so it was like so
Awesome.
exciting to be able to make a hyperlink.
right?
And I had no clue all the dark things that would happen. that were coming, you know what I mean? Like it was like how naive were we? It was like so exciting to have an image on
Right.
a page, and now that we have the dark web.
And now I'm glad you brought that up, because that's what really excited me about coming to this school then. And yeah, it was around the same time that I was like, the internet took off, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, I want to be a part of this. Like, and I still want to be a part of it, even though things have gone awry, right? I think it's now our job, like yourself, like, hey, I know what has happened. I've seen what happened in the last 20, 30 years. Like, how do we make sure that things don't continue to go awry, or how can we influence those things? So yeah, I feel you totally. That's exactly how I feel. Like, super excited. Hey, we're gonna do all these cool things, and well,
Somebody else was doing something else.
yeah. And I think that's gonna be no matter what, right? No matter what technology it is. I mean, that's I guess that's the human part of it, right? So that's why I'm trying to get our army of designers to go out there, do good. Well, that's great. I appreciate that. Yeah.
I don't know if this is like more a personal question, but I'm just curious if you could speak a bit more about, you talked a little bit about where your values align with
Yeah.
Ithaca's and how you're designing like databases for libraries or something like that. Could you talk a little bit more about that, or?
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if that's too much.
Well, so I believe in information to be free and for everyone. And we're developing products that allow people to take their collections and publish them for all to see in an open type way. Now, what's really cool about Ithaca is they're not trying to turn a profit. They are trying to work with different libraries. So we still have to, we have to flip the lights on, and that flicking the lights on takes money. So we still take money, but the way we do it is we partner with these libraries, and we have like a tier system. Like, if you're Harvard, we're going to charge you a little bit more. But if you're an independent library or that doesn't have a lot of money or funding, we're going to work with you and charge you something else, right? So I feel like there's a lot of ways that you can build things and still, charge for them, but there's a lot of different ways to do it. And so I guess that's how I reconcile it. It's doing a partnership, and some of the values that we have are like evidence, right? So evidence is a good one because you deal with usability testing, and you need to bring evidence to build something, but we also think about evidence of like why we're doing something and if it's good or not, and like we think about that. So that's some of the things that we do that align to my core, because I was a digital librarian trying to put things out there at one point, and it's just great to be now being a designer for those people. I kind of understand some of their issues and the values of the people that we work with. I don't know if you've met any librarians, you probably have. I mean, they're amazing people. They're really about information and the freedom of information. It's really just a core value that librarians have. So I love working with them, and I love being one. So that's how that's my personal answer to that. Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you for
Yeah,
your
thank
good questions. Let's give another round of applause to Matthew Martin. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.